In Silburn, with Luthor's Phrygian gasping in pain in a pool of blood on the floor in front of him after having had his right arm severed, Yhwach observes that he does not need to strain himself by attempting to sit up since he must be in incredible pain and permits him to give his report while lying down, which Luthor thanks him for. However, when Yhwach notes that Luthor does not need his legs either if he is not going to sit up, a mortified Luthor forces himself up and claims that he would never disrespect Yhwach by talking to him by lying down. As a petrified Asciaro Ibern watches this, a smirking Yhwach invites Luthor to begin his report. Meanwhile, at the Kurosaki clinic in Karakura town, Ryunosuke Yuki sits around a box of bread with Shino Madarame, Orihime Inoue, Yasutora Sato, and Uryū Ishida, where he takes a bite of bread and laments that he is late. Upon being asked by Uryū about who he is referring to, Yuki clarifies that he means Ichigo Kurosaki and questions if they should not go help him, but Uryū asserts that there is no need to do so since the enemy's Ryatsu has already vanished and Ichigo would never lose to such an opponent anyway. After Uryū declares that he would never help Ichigo anyway and Sato counters that he would, Orihime chuckles and explains to a confused Uryū that she appreciates how he and Ichigo have become such good friends, which is what she likes about him, leaving a flustered Uryū to demand that she not tease him like this. Suddenly, Ichigo announces his return and confirms to a pleased Orihime that he is not injured before Yuki's Denrya Shinki begins ringing, and when he answers it, a startled Yuki informs the others that it is a message for all divisions of the Gotei 13 and puts the Denrya Shinki on speaker mode so everyone can listen to it. In the Shinigami Research and Development Institute, 12th Division 3rd Seat Akon stands in front of a transmitter and requests that those he is speaking to listen closely so he does not have to repeat himself prior to detailing how 7 unidentified individuals infiltrated Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto's office, killing 1 Shinigami but leaving Yamamoto himself unharmed, while another unidentified individual appeared near Black Ridge Gate where the 1st Division was standing guard and killed 116 people in just over 3 minutes, with Lieutenant Chojiro Sasakai being mortally wounded and dying in Yamamoto's office shortly after. Yuki and Shino are alarmed by someone who had served under Yamamoto for centuries being killed like this as Akon concludes that the entry and exit routes used by the intruders is unknown and that the Shikamaku surrounding the Siri-Idi appears to be undisturbed, which means the invaders have some method of bypassing it. The next day, with his friends having departed and dawn beginning to break, Ichigo sits alone on his bed and somberly looks out the window while Sato jogs along the road, Orihime looks out the window of her own apartment, and Uryū stares at his Quincy cross on his own bed in silence. Bluntly admitting that he does not like this, Ichigo decides to patrol the area and departs in his Shinigami form to leap through the air and contemplate the situation. However, Ichigo is interrupted when Nel Tu screams his name and falls toward him from a garganta high above, leaving Ichigo shocked just before she slams into him with Chakasoku, resulting in the two of them crashing into a playground below with enough force to crater the ground upon impact. In the aftermath, an aggravated Ichigo sits up and berates Nel for doing this as soon as she sees him again after almost 2 years of being apart. Despite this, a weeping Nel begs Ichigo to help her because something terrible has happened in Whak-o-Mundo, to his astonishment. Back in Silburn, Yhwach picks up on Luthor's proclaiming that Soul Society would be destroyed in 5 days, and when Luthor explains that this would be enough time for both the Gotei 13 and the Wandenreich to prepare for battle, Yhwach reminds him that this is in the future, which unnerves Luthor, and brings up the latter's assessment of Soul Society and the human world collapsing in the near future if the hollow population were left unchecked after being sent out to observe the border intensity level. When Yhwach inquires about whether he is a prophet, a trembling Luthor is initially unable to answer him, but eventually confirms that he is not once Yhwach presses him on it, only for Yhwach to assert that he wishes to hear of the present instead of the distant future if Luthor cannot accurately predict it prior to blowing the latter's head off in a fountain of blood. With Luthor's limp body collapsing, Yhwach turns his attention to Ibern and notes that there is nothing worthy of praise or punishment about him since he kept Ichigo at bay. However, after Ibern thanks him for this, Yhwach tells him to become a foundation for peace and blows his head off as well. Following this, one of the other messengers questions if a departing Yhwach is okay with disposing of Arrancar soldiers since he previously called them valuable for not requiring combat training, though Yhwach simply shapes the throne he was standing on into a set of stairs that he ascends toward a curtain above him as he proclaims that they can always get more Arrancar because Whak-o-Mundo is under his control and is simply another foundation stone toward invading Soul Society, which he emphasizes by pulling the curtain aside to reveal a bloodied and defeated Tyr Harabel strung up in chains while in her Resurrection, Tiburon. Back in Karakura town, Ichigo is left alarmed by Nel claiming that someone has attacked Whak-o-Mundo and tries to get her to elaborate, but is forced to pull her aside when Peshquatish crashes down next to him as well. Though an upside-down Pesh commends Ichigo for being able to dodge this even though his presence was concealed until the last second and attempts to introduce himself since his torso is stuck in the ground, Ichigo merely stomps on his crotch and identifies Pesh, who groans in pain. Simultaneously, in the Siriidii, the Gotei 13 stands assembled before the crematorium containing Chojiro's body. After envisioning Chojiro kneeling loyally before him once more while standing directly in front of his pyre, Yamamoto orders that the fires be lit. Meanwhile, in the Kurosaki clinic, Yuzu Kurosaki turns on the oven burner in the kitchen as Karen Kurosaki watches television in the adjoining living room. Above them, in his bedroom, Ichigo stands before Orihime, Sato, and Uryū, whom he has brought to meet with Nel and Pesh, and apologizes for calling them over so early in the day, though Sato assures him that it is fine. With Sato questioning whether Whak-o-Mundo has truly been attacked by an outside force, Pesh confirms that it has. Pesh explains that Harabel has ruled Whak-o-Mundo since the deaths of Coyote Stark and Baragon Luzenbairn until the day that the Wandenreich arrived, where they slaughtered dozens of Arrancar, and Yhwach left Harabel herself on the verge of death with his overwhelming power, forcing Nel, Pesh, and Dando Bursten to flee from the advancing army at Harabel's behest while Yhwach vanished alongside Harabel in a flash of darkness. With Pesh concluding that they have no idea why Harabel was taken, Nel cries over Harabel's fate, causing Orihime to comfort her, as Sato wonders who the Wandenreich were. Admitting that he does not know, Pesh reveals that they have taken several Arrancar and abducted Dando as well while he, Nel, and Pesh were trying to escape. After Pesh kneels and begs for Ichigo's help, Sato observes that he does not even need to ask if they will since he knows Ichigo will want to help, which prompts Ichigo to confirm that he cannot just ignore the plight of the Arrancar after what he has heard. Suddenly, Uryū interjects to inform his friends that he cannot accompany them this time, since he cannot help Hollows and Arrancar as a Quincy, but Ichigo accepts this since Quincy exists to destroy Hollows. Once Ichigo explains that he figured Uryū would respond this way and simply did not want the latter to sulk over not being consulted first, Uryū warns Ichigo to be careful, and when Ichigo promises him that they will manage even without him present, Uryū begins to state that this new enemy might be too dangerous, only to be interrupted when Kisuke Urahara comments on the interesting conversation they are having and offers to arrange a trip to Whak-o-Mundo while sitting on Ichigo's windowsill. Back in Silburn, as two attendants clean up the blood on the floor, Jagdarmee Hashwalth picks up Iburn's medallion and brings Yhwach's attention to it. Hashwalth notes that it seems to have been used, but did not end up functioning properly, which Yhwach is perturbed by. During this, in the Garganta, Ichigo runs along a golden racier pathway with his friends and questions how Urahara showed up when he did, leading Urahara to claim that he was hiding outside of Ichigo's window the whole time to wait for the perfect opportunity, though he claims that this was a joke and that he was simply alerted by two Arrancar dropping into Karakura town alongside Ichigo's earlier battle and the unusual activity in Soul Society before concluding that this is all connected and no longer a joking matter. With Urahara observing that it is time to exit, several members of the Jagdarmee usher dozens of chained Arrancar in hooded rags along the sands of Whak-o-Mundo while a Garganta opens in the air above them to release Ichigo and his friends into the air. Despite Nel expressing shock at emerging so high in the air, Ichigo calmly states that it is usually like this with Urahara, who is delighted by Ichigo knowing him so well, and the group falls to the desert below. When one member of the Jagdarmee notes that he heard voices, another points out that the only living things from this location are with them and that they killed everyone else. As the Jagdarmee members dismiss this and move on, Ichigo hides in the wreckage of a building with his hand over Nel's mouth and his other friends around him, where Sato observes that the Jagdarmee did not notice them and Pesh informs Ichigo that he does not sense Dando-chaka's Ryatsu among the captives. Looking out onto the burning sands filled with bodies, Urahara infers that the Jagdarmee did not return because all of the Hollows and Arrancar here are dead, which Orihime affirms after sending Iam to inspect the mutilated corpses. In response, Pesh asserts that he did not expect anything different from the Wandenreich. Pesh points out a large blue flame burning on the sands and details how the Wandenreich use highly condensed racier to burn away even the rocks and buildings of Whak-o-Mundo that are otherwise inflammable, which was one of the many unknown powers of the Wandenreich that sent the Arrancar into disarray and left them no choice but to run away. When Ichigo brings up the Arrancar that were taken captive, Pesh theorizes that they will be used in the Wandenreich's advance guard and have a good chance of ending up like the dead Arrancar before them, which causes Ichigo to decide that they will go rescue the taken Arrancar as well. Though Pesh points out that Dando-chaka is not in this group, Ichigo counters that they will be saving him anyway and that it does not make a difference if they save other Arrancar first, which Pesh admits is true, before leaping away. With Urahara wondering if Ichigo remembers that these Arrancar were his enemies not too long ago, Sato infers that Pesh knew Ichigo would react this way and do something about the plight of the Arrancar prior to Orihime insisting that they do something as well, which Sato agrees with. Watching Orihime and Sato run off after Ichigo, a stunned Pesh declares that they will act as well, to Urahara's concurrence. Elsewhere, the captive Arrancar are lined up against a wall by the Jagdarmee before their leader, Quilge Opie, who sits on a throne with his head resting on his hand. Among the Arrancar, Loli Avern deduces that Quilge is the one they must take down, and when Minoli Malia questions if they should really be doing this, Loli counters that they will end up dead anyway if they do nothing. Clicking his heels together, Quilge demands the attention of the captives and announces that they will be hosting a selection competition for the Hollows and Arrancar to determine which of them will live or die today. Quilge details how he will be stabbing each of the Arrancar in the side, starting from the right end of the line, and instructs them to get down on their knees and beg like they are licking the shoes of the Jagdarmee if they desperately wish to live. With Quilge claiming that the captive Arrancar are those who had the luck, wits, and strength to survive the earlier assault of the Jagdarmee and must not waste this opportunity, a male Arrancar steps forward and begins to ask if he will be spared should he vow to serve the Wandenreich, but Quilge immediately impales him with a spear and proclaims that this is not how it works. After clarifying that joining the Wandenreich requires an entrance exam and that this selection competition simply determines who will get that chance, Quilge pulls his spear out of the dead Arrancar and begins impaling several others one at a time to illustrate what will happen to those who fail, while his subordinates discuss his lack of interest in actually bringing back any Arrancar or even in Whak-o-Mundo itself. Suddenly, when Quilge stabs his spear at them, Loli and Minoli bring up the chains binding their wrists against the tip of the blade, which shatters them, and Minoli cuts through the spear with her Zanpakuto before holding it to Quilge's chin. When two of his subordinates approach him in alarm, Quilge merely notes that they took too long to react and is left puzzled by Loli and Minoli still having their Zanpakuto since those were supposed to have all been confiscated. Once Loli and Minoli introduce themselves and claim that they would never be defeated by an underling like him, Quilge manifests his Reishi Sword and cuts through the blade of Minoli's Zanpakuto, throwing two Reishi daggers into Minoli's right shoulder at the same time, before brutally slamming the hilt of his Reishi Sword into the side of Loli's head when she attacks him, causing her to lose consciousness and collapse. Walking away, Quilge orders his subordinates to punish Loli and Minoli without killing them, since Yhwach ordered him to bring back any foolish Arrancar with courage and they have passed this test, and ruminates on Sosuke Aizen not being as great as everyone considers him to be if he had such weak Arrancar as aides, though he admits that this is to be expected since even Haribel was powerless before Yhwach. However, upon hearing the noises of pain behind him growing louder and turning around to reprimand his subordinates for overdoing it, Quilge sees Pulsera Cuerno decapitating dozens of his subordinates and hurtling toward him. EP 368 Tres Bestias arrive. Emilou Apacci, Franceska Mila Rose, and Cyan Sung-Sun confront Quilge. With Quilge catching the Zanpakuto mid-flight without injury and wondering who they are, Emilou Apacci stands on a rocky outcropping alongside Franceska Mila Rose and Cyan Sung-Sun, where she expresses disbelief at Quilge speaking poorly of Haribel without even knowing who they are. As Apacci disparages Quilge for being clueless, Sung-Sun observes that the Wandenreich seems to have captured Haribel while they were away, and Mila Rose admonishes Quilge for getting cocky, which Quilge smirks at. Miles away, Ichigo moves along the sands and sees a mushroom cloud of smoke rising in the distance, causing him to realize that the fight has begun. Clinging to the top of Ichigo's head, which he is alarmed by, Nel recognizes the Ryatsu as belonging to the Tres Bestias and explains to Ichigo that they serve directly under Haribel as powerful enforcers who are always trying to kill each other, meaning that the enemy army is as good as dead already. When Nel begins gripping his eyes and screaming about how terrifying the Tres Bestias are, a panicking Ichigo tells her that he cannot see where he is going now. Meanwhile, Apacci sneezes while firing a Siro, causing it to warp and twist around and forcing Mila Rose to leap out of its path before it blows up several members of the Jagdarmee. Upon landing, Apacci wonders if Mila Rose was talking about her behind her back and casually punches the head off a member of the Jagdarmee who attempts to attack her from behind, causing a large volume of blood to gush out of his neck wound. In response, Mila Rose denies talking about her and tells Apacci to wipe the snot from her nose while brutally cutting down two more members of the Jagdarmee with her Zanpakuto. As Quilge watches this with admiration from his throne, Sung-Sun appears behind him and warns Quilge against getting distracted prior to rapidly attacking him with her own Zanpakuto, though Quilge easily evades her strikes. EP 368 Quilge suggests surrender. Quilge suggests that the Tres Bestias join the Wandenreich to reunite with Haribel. Quilge suggests that the Tres Bestias surrender rather than continue to fight, and though Mila Rose comes down on him with an overhead strike that levels the surrounding area while Apacci asserts that he is not as strong as he claims to be, Quilge emerges unharmed from the resulting cloud of sand and elaborates that surrendering to join the Wandenreich will allow the Tres Bestias to serve Yhwach alongside their beloved Harabel, which he believes is a level of happiness that they will never be able to attain otherwise. However, Apacci, Mila Rose, and Sung-Sun all reject this and demand that Quilge stop underestimating them. EP 368 Mayuri addresses captains. Mayuri Kurosaki addresses his fellow captains in the 1st Division barracks. In turn, Quilge realizes that his negotiations have fallen through and expresses disappointment at this. Simultaneously, in a captain's meeting in the 1st Division barracks, Akon finishes delivering his report on the incursion to the assembled captains and is dismissed by his captain, Mayuri Kurosaki, who steps in to explain that the Ryoka identifying themselves as the Wandenreich are connected to the recent mass disappearance of hollows in the human world, which has caused a great imbalance of souls and could possibly mean the destruction of both the human world and soul society itself. As Mayuri assumes that the captains are astute enough to have already figured out that the only ones able to erase souls from the cycle of rebirth are Quincy, Ichigo reaches the site of the battle and is shocked to find a grinning Quilge standing over Apacci, Mila Rose, and Sung-Sun, who lie defeated before him.